ever sit in a hot tub that is lukewarm and it's just, it's bubbly. And welcome back to another episode of Exposing Ourselves, another very special episode of Exposing Ourselves. I'm Travis Ritchie, and this is episode 30. This is the show where we expose each other to new things. Matt, a music fan, will assign me one of his favorite albums or playlists to listen to each week, and I, a movie buff, will give him one of my favorite films, and we come together on this very podcast to discuss it all, except this week it's neither of our favorite anythings, and with me as always is my good friend...
Matt Runquist. Hey, Travis. This week we both watched the movie Creed, and we listened to the Radiohead album OK Computer.
Yep, for the first time each.
For the first time ever, yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. So before we get into that, and this is just, the format of our very special episode, right? So we're just, every 10 episodes, we try something where we assign a movie that I haven't seen, and Matt assigns an album that he hasn't seen, but we think we're going to like.
Yeah, this is the third time we've done this, and it really is just sort of throwing caution to the wind and being like, this is probably good, I think.
Yeah, no, I do think, I did choose a movie that I've heard good things about and that I've, been told is good.
Well, and I chose an album which a lot of people consider the best album of the 90s, but which I had never heard.
Really?
Yeah.
That's without giving too much away, that shocks me. But before we get into any of that, Matt, how have you been? Bean?
I have.
How have you been, Bean?
I have been very well. Thank you very much. Not too much excitement going on other than taping episodes out of order. So sneak peek, everyone. We put an episode in the can with our very first guest star, and you'll get to hear that next week. But this week, it's just a very special episode. And I've been practicing guitar and working and doing all my normal stuff.
All right, just being an adult, that's nice. I had an interesting thing the last couple weeks, I guess. We at the Collaborative, which is my acting group, have had this play reading group that we do, where a couple of days a month we'll get together and we'll just read a play, which is kind of nice. And then our president suggested to the people that were running that group, hey, could you choose one and make it a staged reading and do it as a fundraiser? And we did that, and it was... We this last weekend is when we actually performed the staged reading, and I have no idea what to expect from a staged reading. What is that? Is that I've been to script readings where everybody's on stage in a chair or standing with a music stand, and they're just reading their scripts, and that's okay. But it's certainly not a fully staged performance where you actually have props and sound effects and lights and costumes and all that. So what we did was something very much in between, where we had our scripts in hand, but it was acted out. So we had a stage with minimal chairs and a couple of tables here and there, and we just performed as much as we could about this play. And the play was called Incendiary, and it's a kind of a film noir comedy about this detective who falls in love with a fire chief, a female fire chief, but it turns out the female fire chief is an arsonist, and she's been setting fires that she herself puts out. And honestly, reading through the script, I didn't love it, but performing it with the cast and these people from the Collaborative, it was an amazing experience. And we just did that this weekend. We had to add an extra performance, but we had 3 sold-out performances. They're free tickets. We couldn't charge anything, but they were packed houses, which was really fun, and heard really great things about it. So that was my big thing this weekend. And I'm rambling, but there's one thing that happened yesterday on our closing night. I was leaving the house, and I had been taking my a couple of things with me. I have my costume and my duffel bag with my shoes and my hat and stuff like that, and then my backpack with my computer in it. And because I'm like, oh, I'll get there and I have some time, and maybe I'll do some writing and work on my next book while I'm there. 3 days in a row, plus rehearsals, never once pulled out the laptop. So this time I'm like, okay, I'll just bring my backpack. And instead of putting my coffee and stuff in my backpack, I'll put it in my duffel bag. So I'll just bring my duffel bag and my costume. And I get there, and my character doesn't show up until like half an hour into the play, maybe 20 minutes. And so I'm just sitting there, and everybody goes out on stage except me and my partner. And everybody goes on stage. The play has started, and I go to like grab my script and realize that it has been in my backpack every day. And so I didn't have my script that we have on hand because we're not supposed to be off book. And so I had to run around the front and grab the producer's script from her so that I could have it on hand. It was so embarrassing. I felt like a complete and colossal idiot. But it was still an adventure. You know, it's just one of those acting adventures, and now I have that memory and that story.
Exactly. It's funny. Speaking of firefighters, I've had this idea kicking around in the back of my head for like a little bit, where it's like picture like a bar, right? And a woman and a guy are talking. She's like, "What do you do?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm a reverse arsonist." And she says, "What is a reverse arsonist?" And he's like, "Well, you know how arsonists really love fire? Well, I really hate fire. So when I find out there's a fire going on, I go and I put out the fire." And she's like, "Isn't that just a firefighter?" And he's like, "You're not getting it."
There's something to that. There's something to that, and I think the comedy comes when he goes out and he puts out fires that are good fires.
Yeah,
like he goes out and puts out campfires, and he puts out
right.
Bonfires on the beach and stuff like that.
Well, he just really hates fire,
Yeah, sure, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I love fire. I grew up a little bit of a pyromaniac. My parents were always telling me to light the candles, light the furnace, light the house on fire. And I did. I didn't light the house on fire. I'm kidding. And they never asked me to.
Jerks.
You just were not amused by that at all.
Oh, man.
Okay. Well, let's get into the meat then, I guess.
I guess let's get into the meat. Hey, let's switch things up a little and talk about the music first.
If you would like, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about the music first.
Yeah, because I would like to end on a high note.
Wow. Well, in that case, we should definitely do the music second because Tom York is all about the high notes. But, all right. So I'm going to do an intro here, but I'm going to give a little more background than usual.
Yeah, because I want to hear not only your intro, but also what you thought of it since this is your first time through.
Well, what I really want to get into for our listeners is why I've never heard this album before. This is like, Travis, it's hard for me to explain to you like what a big deal this album was and how up my alley this sort of thing is. Right?
Yeah, it's totally up your alley.
It's totally up my alley. And so in the 90s, right, I grew up listening, so in the 80s, I grew up listening to like very mainstream radio rock, Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, Whitesnake, like hair bands, but not like the metally hair bands, like rock and roll, right? REO Speedwagon was a really big one in my household. And then, I, like many kids who were 14 in 1991, when Nirvana came along, it really changed my life. It changed the whole music industry, and changed the type of music that people were listening to, changed fashion. I think like Nirvana ushered in the 90s, right? And that type of music, that type of music basically wiped out a whole genre. Like, all those bands that I just mentioned, I think Aerosmith is the only one to have any actual hits in the 90s. And they were kind of counter-programming to what was really going on. But all these bands popped up in the years following the release of Nevermind, that were very much trying to, do that same formula. It's like 3 or 4 guys in a wheat field, and they're all kind of grungy looking, and they're
In a wheat field?
yeah, I'm thinking of the cover of the Candlebox album, but it's always like rural and very heavily overexposed and contrasty, like Anton Corbijn, if you're familiar with that photographer. There's a very specific stylistic thing that I'm talking about here.
Okay.
And Radiohead had this huge album called The Bends, with its big song Creep, which I guarantee you've heard. Even okay, and you know what it is, right? And
Yep.
for whatever reason, Radiohead in that album didn't really do it for me. But in 1997, they released their follow-up to that. And this is 5 years after Nirvana had changed the world. And music was evolving like it does. And all of these things that sort of were, alternative and different in 1992 were now very much part of the mainstream. And so when Radiohead released this album, it was like a big deal. But I was a sophomore in college, and I was too cool for school.
Yes, I was going to say that's probably why.
Yeah, I was into all these tiny little labels out on the West Coast, and Sub Pop was obviously Sub Pop was the pinnacle, but I was listening to Pavement and Sebadoh, and a little bit later Modest Mouse and Built to Spill, and
You're
also
just saying words right now.
I know, but the idea is that the audience gets this, because I'm really doing this to apologize for having never heard this album before. Okay, so the point is all my friends got super duper into this album, and I, for whatever reason, did not. And I wasn't I wasn't against it, right? I didn't hear the couple of Radiohead songs off of it and be like, oh, I hate this. But it just, because it was so popular, I was pushing against that. And I was like, they don't really do it for me. And so I never sat down and listened to this whole album. Obviously, I'd heard Paranoid Android before. I'd heard Karma Police before. I'd heard a couple other songs off of here once or twice, right?
Okay.
But I had never sat down and listened to the entire album. And what's really interesting, and people who are Radiohead fans maybe will understand why I never went back and listened to this, I did hear the album after this, which was also highly acclaimed. It was called Kid A, and I thought that album was terrible. Really, really bad. It was like this ambient mess that was not anywhere near as good as actual ambient music, and I will go to my grave hating that album. But anyways, and so it made me want to not go back and listen to OK Computer. So point being, this album sold millions of copies. A lot of people consider this the best album of the 90s. Certainly people who are into alternative rock music, this is the jam. It's got all kinds of it's got weird sounds. It's got very inventive song structures. It's got sort of epic songs. It's got quiet acoustic guitar things. It's got some ethereal, gorgeous melodies on it. And so it's got a lot to recommend it, and I don't want to talk about how I felt about it first. I want you to talk.
Okay.
I want you to talk first about how you felt about it, because one, I feel like you've given the game away a little bit, but also I know that you're not a big fan of vocalists who don't enunciate, and Tom York does not enunciate hardly at all, except when he does. Weirdly.
Yeah, and that's actually not my biggest complaint about this album. I will say I can give you affirmation on everything that you've said about the what this album does have, its positive attributes. The thing is that for you, those are positive attributes. Some of those same qualities for me didn't work. And I know there is an audience for this album, absolutely. It's just not me. And I think my biggest thing that I didn't like about it is that, okay, so it has some variety in it, right? And there are some songs that seem very well orchestrated. You know, we've used that kind of phraseology before, where we talk about a song that it has been constructed very lovingly. But then there are other songs that feel improvised and feel like, hey, we've got four people who are pretty good on their instruments. Everybody play. And everybody's kind of fighting for their own attention and their own space in the song, and the drums don't really fit with the guitar, and everything seems noisy to me. And I'd say there's at least a third of those, and then there's a third of the well constructed ones, and then maybe another third of kind of in between, less special to me, but also not offensively, sounding, like as far as like hurting my ears to listen to. But here's my biggest issue with this album is that it is so morose. It is the depression feeling of it just effuses every cell of this album, and I think that's something of its time, right? And I knew Radiohead from Creep, and that's probably the only thing I knew Radiohead from. And the name, it's just kind of in the zeitgeist, so I knew of them, but I've never listened to them before. And I was a little, I don't know how to describe. You know how you ever sit in a hot tub that is lukewarm, and it's bubbly, but it's just disappointing, and it's a little depressing to sit in it.
Yeah.
That was my emotional reaction to listening to this album.
Lukewarm hot tub.
It's the closest thing it's the analogy that popped into my head. And so I don't know. The guys, the lead singer, and you've said his name a couple times, and I've already forgotten it.
Tom York.
Okay, Tom York. He just has that style where it's very depressing and very. Yeah. One other thing that I thought of as a way to kind of like put words into this, and it came about when I was listening to the spoken word song that they have in here, which is you remember which one?
Fitter Happier.
Fitter Happier, yeah. And so basically this song is basically a list of just things, and it seems at once to be a critique of modern society, maybe capitalism, maybe I don't know. It kind of doesn't seem to be super focused, except to be a mindset of the youth of the time, the mid '90s, where it was kind of, I don't know. It was maybe the thing of the time was like acknowledging that we are depressed, and as kids, as young people, we don't feel like we fit in, and we feel like we're being pressured to be these things, and we don't like that pressure, and maybe that's what that's railing against. But to me, it just feels like a mindset that refuses the possibility of optimism, right? And where happiness is, or where the pursuit of happiness is not an admirable thing. It's not real. It's not real to be happy. It's not, that kind of thing is. It feels like that's what they were railing against, and I kind of push back against that. I like to be happy. I like to be optimistic. You know me. I'm a cheerful guy. I try to be anyway. I try to put that out into the world, and I just didn't like that. I
think that's actually why you maybe didn't fit into your generation particularly well. Because I've spoken a lot with friends, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned it on the podcast, but there is sort of a great tragedy of our generation in terms of, I have talked about it once, just the idea that we were raised in so much irony and sarcasm that it became a language to us, and that authenticity or real emotion was seen as, I don't know if I want to say weakness exactly, but it was seen as inauthentic, right? Like the most authentic you can be is like emotionally closed off and ironic and
or negative,
right?
right.
And
I think real positive emotion was seen as inauthentic.
Yeah, real positive emotion was seen as inauthentic. And thankfully the children have come along and changed that about society and about the world, right? But those of us who, you know, were sort of steeped in that for 15 years, really, I had to make a conscious effort to stop interacting with the world in that way. One, because it was harming my personal relationships, but two, because it was harming myself, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to have a healthy relationship with the world when you're constantly at least pretending to be at odds with it all the time.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, you know, I think that's something. I think you might be onto something, and I was, I mean, lucky or unlucky enough that I had to do the opposite. I had to pretend to be happy as a defense mechanism, because I was, you know, constantly teased. You know, I was born with Bell's palsy. Our listeners might not, but half my face is partially paralyzed, and that's a tough thing for the kid to grow up with, and it's a tough thing for me to have as an adult. But my optimism and my cheerfulness are in large part put on in order for me to survive on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm doing the opposite of what these musicians are doing in order to just live a life. And one other thing I kind of like pegged when I was listening to this for the second time through is that back in the 90s, all that kids could do was be depressed and smoke weed, and that's all that we had. But kids nowadays, this is the euphoria generation where suddenly it's we also have sex and ecstasy and you know. So it's a different world today than we lived in back in the 90s.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I should probably talk a little bit about how I felt about this now.
Yeah, please do.
I had such an ambivalent reaction to this, Travis. There was part of me that was like, you know what? I was absolutely right to not be into this. Like, it's like, it's morose. It's hard to understand what any of it is about. Like, it's funny because he's very ethereal and weird, except when he's not. But then the lyrics that you can understand don't really make a ton of sense anyways. You know, they're definitely trying to say something, and it's funny, the song that you picked up on, Fitter Happier, is probably the song where that is easiest to understand the point of it because you can understand the words, all of them.
Right.
Yeah.
But one of the things I sorry to interrupt, but I pegged, you know, you not being able to understand the words. At one point, I compared it in my head to the Beatles and how some of their songs are kind of nonsensical, like An Octopus's Garden or something like that. But then they have variety in their music. In an individual song, you'll have a variety of tone and measure and beat and whatever that I think that Radiohead did not. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
don't know.
you.
No, it's all right. But then, you know, but then I would go through periods where I'm like, man, some of this stuff is really compelling. You know, certainly there are a bunch of hits on here. Paranoid Android is unequivocally a hit.
And I have to appreciate the reference, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference.
Right. Exit Music for a Film was a hit. Karma Police was a hit. No Surprises was a hit. There's and justifiably, and there are several other songs on here that I really dug. And so you know, Travis, I'll be honest, I still don't know what my rating for this is going to be because I go back and forth on this between this really is genius, I totally get it, to man, they were just like throwing stuff at the wall and happened to hit on something that resonated with people, but they had no idea what they were doing.
Oh,
Right?
I mean, I feel like it's probably that they knew exactly what they were doing at the time, and I feel like I understand why this was a hit in 1997
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
But I personally wouldn't have been the audience for it then either. So
Well,
that's all.
that's fair. That's fair. I so yeah. I have such a hot and cold reaction to this. Like, and maybe it's just my orneriness coming through and my desire to be like, I was right to not listen to this for 25 years. You know, maybe I'm just trying to justify myself. But
I'm a little surprised that you're that down on it, to be honest. I thought this was much more up your alley.
no, it is. That's what I'm getting at, right? Like, it is absolutely up my alley, but like the things that are annoying about it are super duper annoying. Like, there's a lot of like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, consonants exist, man. They do. Like, you're not French. Like, consonants are real, you know?
Yeah.
But man, some of it, like some of the bass work. I mean, you know, I'm a bassist. Like, I was in a band in the '90s, and I was a bassist in that band. And the bass on this is fantastic stuff. It's really, really good. Really, like it glues all the music together, which is what the
Okay.
best bass does, right? Because the guitarist is all over the place. He's making weird noises. There's all kinds of crazy effects on the guitars.
Yeah.
You know, there's very little in the way of like grooves on this album. But you know, the reason that the guitarist is free to do that is because the bass is really holding it down for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's times when I really, really love this, and I have exactly the reaction to it that you expected me to have. So I think, you know, like overall, I do have a positive feeling about this album for sure, right?
Okay.
But you're right, it is flawed, and it is. I think it's a perfect artifact of that time, right? Where there's this sort of inner emotional conflict between like because the other big mover of culture in the 90s was the idea of authenticity. And we talked a little bit about this with fun and how fun sort of was like the death of authenticity as a marker of goodness, right? You know, like because with the open use of auto tune and the overproduced album, and it's still being like crazy popular and embraced by people who are sort of hipster and like, you know, are always looking for the next big thing.
Are you using kind of a like that negativity as a synonym for authenticity? Like, can't you be authentically cheerful?
No, right. Not in 1997. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, but also authenticity comes from like, you know, art, like expressing your art, right? You're not corporate. You're not the man, right? And obviously this is a major label album, but like, so in the 90s, we had this concept of selling out, right? The idea that there was some sort of authenticity from being like relatively unknown and doing things for the art of it. And then when you signed to a major label or when you know, used fancy studios or good equipment, you were somehow like not authentic anymore. And that more is what I mean rather than like the negativity per se, right?
Right,
But
I get that.
yeah.
But it just seems like when people of who are into this kind of music and this kind of like dourness, when they say authentic, they mean authentic means deep, dark emotion.
I think yeah, you know, deep dark emotion, but also just like sometimes it kind of just means bad, right? Like it just means, you know, like if something is too slick or too produced, then
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know.
I mean, and that's another thing too. Yeah. So like anytime you have, but that's a separate thing. Like I get that. That's the same reason I didn't watch the first couple of Ace Ventura movies because they were so popular. I assumed they must be awful. And I mean, they're kind of awful in retrospect, but at the time they weren't as bad as I expected them to be when I finally did watch them.
That's fair.
So,
That's fair. We've spent a lot of time on this music, and I feel like
yes.
it's time to rate it. I want to hear your
Yes.
I want to hear your rating first.
I'll give it a 3. I give it
a
yep,
3.
Yep. This is totally not my thing. It had about a third of things that I thought were well done, but the other 2/3 were straight up bad to me, and so yeah.
Wow. I feel like that's unnecessarily harsh, but
this is for me. This is my rating.
no, I know.
Just for me. So if you if listeners can identify with my tastes,
yeah,
that's a good barometer for how they'll like this album.
Okay, well, I have spiraled wildly this week. I've gone everywhere from 10 to like 6. I would say, like, at one point I was like, I'm gonna give this a 6, right? I'm not gonna give it a 6, but I'm not gonna give it a 10 either. And I, as much of a cop out as it is, I'm gonna split the difference and give it an 8. So.
Oof. What? An 8 is a very good score, and you have not been talking about this album like it is an 8, my friend. Stay with. Don't let me influence you. But like,
I think you'll find when you listen back, there's quite a bit that I'm very positive about.
Okay, all right, yeah. Viewers, you let us know if you agree with that. That Matthew rated it the score that he should have. Based on what he said in the review. By the way, if you'll notice that my voice quality has changed, I had in the middle of recording some sort of malfunction with my recording setup, and so now I am recording on a different microphone. I apologize for the jarring nature of the audio. If it is, I don't know. I'm not listening to it until we're done recording, so hopefully it's still good.
I apologize, but only if an apology is necessary. I'm not sure. I don't know.
There you go.
But I do.
That's exactly it. So, all right, great. An 8 and a 3. Well, let's move on to the. So, part of my malfunction was that my entire computer shut down, and so I don't have all my notes. But I had you watch Creed, which is the 7th movie in the Rocky franchise, and it was an interesting thing because I, growing up, watched Rocky. Well, first, a little about Creed. It was the first one not written by Sylvester Stallone, by the way. He wrote all the Rockies up through Rocky Balboa in 2006, I think it was. And then this was 2015, and it was directed by and written, although he had a co-writer, by Ryan Coogler. So this is his 2nd movie. And MGM Studios, after a fairly successful initial movie, independent movie, they gave him Rocky and were like, here, reboot the franchise. They had to convince Sylvester Stallone to come back on, and they wrote this movie about the son, the illegitimate son of Apollo Creed, who decides he wants to get into boxing. And the son is played by Michael B. Jordan, who was in Ryan Coogler's first movie, and continued to go on with Ryan Coogler to his next big project, which was Black Panther, which was a $1 billion franchise movie. So this was an interesting thing to see this as kind of the in-between of his process. And it also had, in addition to Sylvester Stallone, it had Felicia Rashad. It had, I feel like I'm missing one other big person who was in this movie. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't, actually. Those were the 2 big ones for me. Stallone, Felicia Rashad, Michael B. Jordan. That's 3.
Yeah,
but,
okay. I feel like there's Tessa Thompson, who you wouldn't know, but she plays the girlfriend, and this was also her earlier work. But she would go on to play Valkyrie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, introduced in the movie Thor Ragnarok, and then she was a big part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe since then. So and she was great, man. I got to go back a little bit to talk about Rocky, and I grew up with Rocky. Rocky was if you were a red-blooded American, you were watching Rocky. There was a movie where Rocky IV, he went up against the Russians, and basically Rocky was one of the artistic representations of the Cold War in the 80s. And so to be an American was to love Rocky Balboa. And so they had 4 Rocky movies, and they were all pretty good. And then they had a 5th one, which was kind of maligned in 2000.
This is 99.
1999,
Or
yeah.
sorry, 1990. Like, it was 1977 through 1990, and then there was that killed the franchise until 2006. Rocky Balboa.
Oh yeah, really? Okay, so
Yeah.
not, yeah, because you're right. So and then 2006 they did Rocky Balboa, and it kind of was well received. It had Milo Ventimiglia as Rocky's son, and there was a whole father-son story there, and then that kind of was a good farewell to the Rocky franchise until this movie starts it up, focusing on Adonis Creed, who is the son of Apollo Creed. Now, I was never a huge fan of Rocky. I don't think I saw all of them, except maybe I don't know if I saw Rocky Balboa. I have a vague memory of it, but I don't really remember it. So I don't have anything invested in this movie. It's just that I heard good things about it. So it was on our list of movies that we could watch where we would both be exposed at the same time. And I gotta say, I really liked it. I thought that it was a very well done movie. And it was funny because I don't like sports movies generally. You know, if there aren't spaceships or aliens or dragons in it, it's very low on my list of priorities to watch. And this movie had none of those things, surprisingly, and but also I liked it. So before I go more into my thoughts, I want to hear yours. I've been talking for too long.
Yeah, so this movie, Travis, awakened something in me.
Oh my goodness.
I had forgotten what a huge fan of Rocky I was when I was a kid.
Huh.
Your description of it is absolutely correct. And Rocky owned the 80s. You know, on an earlier episode, we talked about how Sylvester Stallone was the greatest action star, or sorry, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the greatest action star of all time. But Stallone, between Rambo and Rocky, that was his claim to maybe being close to Schwarzenegger.
Oh yeah, they were neck and neck for sure.
And I loved Rocky. It's funny, I saw the original Rocky alone, which I have no idea how, right? Because because I was a latchkey kid in the 80s, right?
Sure.
But I found out that he had written it himself in 3 days. You know, the classic, like the story that everybody tells about Rocky.
However many days. I think I heard a couple weeks, but you heard 3 days.
Yeah, and I think Stallone's story about this has sort of changed over the years. But yeah, it was he wrote it very quickly, and I loved these movies. Absolutely loved them. And so I had heard good things about Creed, and so when you said that that we were going to watch it, I was excited. I was like, oh yeah, cool. I have been meaning to watch these, right? And I got to admit, it sucked me so far back in. And what was interesting is I watched this with my wife, as I do most of these movies, and she had never seen a Rocky film. And so I gave her...
A single one.
She'd never seen any of them. So I gave her a quick summary, including the spoiler of the first Rocky movie, which is that Rocky doesn't win.
Right.
And the way they structured this movie, taking a different character with a very different background from Rocky and put him into basically the same plot in a way that works, was just a masterstroke, because it reflects the original story and comments on the original story, and the beats are all there. It just, what a beautiful piece of filmmaking this is. I I will totally admit that I am in the tank for the Rocky franchise. I'm sure this movie is not as good as it felt to me, but this movie felt perfect to me.
It's not without criticism, but I do agree the theme, the Rocky franchise as a whole is full of themes of fathers and sons, right? It's the boxer and his trainer, it's the boxer and his son, it's all fathers and sons. And so this movie reflects that by both having Adonis not have a father. Apollo Creed died before he was born, but also he latches on to Rocky as kind of a father figure, and that works very well.
What a
The acting,
fascinating, I gotta go into this. What a fascinating life story that they gave this character, too, because he is simultaneously the child of a single mother who has a mother who loves him very, very much, whose mother died, whose mother is still alive, who came out of poverty, who was raised in a foster home, who was also raised in a mansion. Like,
yeah,
this character is such a ball of contradictions, and then to stick him in that Rocky story, that like underdog versus the champ, Philadelphia boxers are the best thing. What
yeah,
a genius idea. Like,
yeah,
kudos
yeah.
to Ryan Coogler, because I'm sure that Stallone, when this was brought to him originally, was like, "What is this crap?" Right?
No, he's like, no, I'm not going to do.
Right, and then
Yeah,
I'm sure he read the script and was like, "This is it, right? Like,
yeah.
this is the key to opening it up and restarting the legacy and restarting the franchise." And it really just, wow, man, wow.
Yeah. There are a couple of specifically amazing things about this movie. First off, the acting is on every level wonderful. I love Felicia Rashad, who comes in the first
Oh,
scene and
yeah.
is the best version of herself. I've always loved her.
I jumped when I saw her.
Yeah, and I don't remember if she was if she was actually seen as anybody in the previous movies.
I don't think so, but I mean, it's funny, right? Like, she
Was
popped
she
on
Apollo Creed's wife in like part 2 or something?
I don't think so, but it has been
Okay.
a lot of years since I've seen it. But
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to
she
check,
is
but
she is in fact a vampire, right? I mean, we
she looks great.
we acknowledge the fact that she looks exactly the same as she did on Cosby, right? Like, that's
Well, no, but yes, yeah, she looks amazing, absolutely for her age, and but also you've the other female lead, Tessa Thompson. It took me a while to kind of recognize where she was, but she looks like she actually reminds me a lot of the eldest daughter from the Cosby Show. Do you remember who that was?
oh God, I do, and now I can't remember it.
Yeah, I can't remember her name.
She also
and,
starred Lisa Bonet.
Lisa Bonet, yeah, she reminds me a lot of that in look and kind of attitude, and but she was so real, and Sylvester Stallone's performance was genuine and heartfelt and interesting, and you really believed every emotion that went across his face, and it wasn't too much, it wasn't too little, it was just right. And then, of course, Michael B. Jordan, who just owns the film and carries it.
Yeah, because he's the one who's got to embody these contradictions, right? And
Right.
wow, does
And
he
he
do
does.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, he does the same thing actually in Black Panther very well, which is kind of interesting. Now that I'm seeing, this performance and kind of putting it into context, the Black Panther character is a very interesting one. I may have you watch that someday, just to make you watch it, but. And maybe you'll be into it now that you know that Ryan Coogler, who directed and wrote this movie, also did Black Panther. So they brought him.
I mean, you can do that if you want. I have seen the first 10 minutes of Black Panther.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, that's not the whole movie, my friend. Um, so there, this also, I want to talk about the filmmaking of this movie. You wonder at the beginning of it how they're going to make boxing any more interesting than they ever have before. And what they do is in the middle of the movie, the first kind of big fight, they give you a one take, 2 round boxing match, and the camera is in the ring, floating in between the boxers, around them, and how it gets all that, like the choreography of that. I did read that they did 13 takes of that boxing match and ended up using like take 11, but it was a really extraordinary piece of filmmaking as well as everything else.
Yeah, I've mentioned on the podcast before that I don't ordinarily notice oneers, but that one is so theatrical and so in your face. You have to notice it. And I want to say I appreciated that was that fight, right? I was a little concerned that they were going to be like, and then for the final fight, we're going to do that again. And they didn't.
Right.
They instead went to a much more traditionally shot Rocky style fight, which is like a regular boxing match, but with about 400 times more punches, right?
Right. Yeah. 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 And as far as the ending goes, I also liked that they, because I'm watching it going, okay, this is so clearly paralleling the first Rocky movie. You can't have him win the fight. You can't have him win his first worldwide match against the champion of the world, right? And how they got him in that ring, by the way, with that guy was pretty well. I was pretty down with that whole plot contrivance.
Yeah.
And but also you don't want him to lose because then you're just copying the first movie.
Yeah.
And it didn't occur to me actually that the way to fix that was punish your character but have him stay on his feet for all 12 rounds of the match and end up losing by like technicality. I guess
it's a split decision actually.
Oh, okay. What does that mean? Do you know?
It means two of the judges had the one guy winning and one guy had the other guy winning.
Oh, okay. So there are an odd number of judges, and so
there are an odd number of judges.
Got it. So, but that was actually really nice because it gives him somewhere to go, and but it also like gives him a victory. It was a really good, like mix of outcomes that felt very satisfying to me. Yeah. So, do you have any critiques? Because I got a couple.
Oh yeah, I understood what they were doing with the video game introductions to the enemy fighters, but I decided I didn't like it. I gave it a chance, but I decided it was too intrusive and I didn't like it.
Yeah, that's kind of a mid 2010s thing to do in film, I think.
I think it's a long movie, and they didn't want to go through the work of ginning up a bunch of exposition for guys that were fundamentally video game characters. And so they were just like, hey, look, here's the video game card. And I get it. I just didn't like it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying too. I didn't mind it so much, but I understand why it was off-putting. For me, I don't think they ever fully explained why he wants to box. Like, sure, they show him in a career where he, because of his affluence that he gets kind of found into. The main character, Adonis, manages to land in a company and he gets a promotion and he's going to have an office and an assistant and all that, but he gives it all up to be a boxer. And I don't think they ever fully explained what drove him to do that.
I think it was to make a connection with his father, who he had never known. I thought that was pretty straightforward, actually. He was always watching his father's fights in the gorgeous home theater film room that Felicia Rashad had conveniently in their house, and he both of his parents were dead, and he's heard all of these things. In the world of Rocky, Apollo Creed is the greatest boxer that ever lived, right? He's considered to be better than Rocky, right?
Right.
One of the, in this world, one of the reasons that Rocky beat Apollo Creed eventually is because Apollo got old, right? It's not that Rocky was objectively a better boxer than Apollo, right?
Sure.
And so, Adonis wants that connection with his father. He's heard all of these things about his father and what a warrior he was and how he was the greatest boxer that ever lived. And he doesn't want to work for a financial services firm, taking rich people's money. He wants to feel alive and connected to his father. Like, that to me you said the story, the franchise is about fathers and sons, and his motivation is about his father.
I get that objectively. I and even thematically, I just didn't quite think they got there, or maybe they got there at the end, but I wasn't really thinking, because that Rocky does have some moments where he kind of nails home the theme of, like, you're not him, you don't have anything to prove to him. But I think that it took a while for me to understand as a viewer. Maybe more than halfway through the movie, I'm like, why are you doing this again? But that's kind of a nitpick. It doesn't really matter. My only other nitpick is the movie felt long, but I don't know that I would have cut anything, because I appreciated every part of it. And I like that they gave him the love interest. I think she was an important character. She was more than just arm candy. She had her own, impetus to live life. And
remember my read on Rise of the Planet of the Apes, where there was like the love interest, and she literally had nothing to do for the entire movie. It was like, it was like somebody was checking off the love interest box. This was not that. She was her own person. My wife pointed out it was really cool how she very much had like an ambivalent relationship towards his boxing. Like, she was like worried about him, but also supportive and at ringside. And there was never like you can't box, I love you too much or anything. Like, there wasn't that moment. It was just like she was... how a real person would deal with that, which is like, well, I don't love this, but clearly it's your thing, and I don't want to take your thing away from you. So, it was really good. I really can't say enough good things about this movie, and I like I said, it may just be that, like, this triggered 8-year-old me to like come out of his shell and be like, man, I freaking love Rocky.
That's great. I think that's fantastic. You know what? I agree. I agree. I will be watching Creed 2 and 3. If you want, we can save them for future special episodes.
Honestly, I don't know if there's any upside in that, right? Because either there are episodes like this where we're both like, it was amazing.
Yeah, that's true.
Or it's like, I was super disappointed because this sucked. But
I will say, unrelated to the movie itself, I bought the movie instead of renting it, which I don't know why. I just thought that'd be a good idea. And so I bought it on Amazon, and I have no special features, where if I had spent almost the same amount of money to buy it on iTunes, I would have all these great special DVD features, extra features, which I don't have now. So I was after the movie was done, I really wanted to go in and see about the making of this movie, and see about Michael B. Jordan's transformation.
See if any of it's on YouTube. Might be.
Probably they will be. Yeah.
So one other thing that I wanted to call out specifically is, a big part of the Rocky movies has always been the slower contemplative moments, right? Like, these movies are never just about the highly intense arena action scenes. They're always about that, contrasted with like the loneliness and intensity of training and those like interactions with people that are very like intense and emotional and one-on-one. And I loved that this movie included those things and gave time for those. Because that is what makes it a Rocky movie, is that it's not just wall-to-wall action, you know?
Right. Yeah.
I also loved the fact that there were 3 big fights and there were 3 training montages. I counted.
Yes. Yeah. No, it was good. It was structured very well from a 3-act structure point of view. I will say I don't know that I needed Rocky to get cancer.
Oh man, I was in tears. Yes, no man, I'm gonna defend this movie till I die. Rocky gets cancer, and then like Michael B. Jordan threatens not to do the fight if Rock refuses to fight. I fight, you fight. Oh God, I was in tears, man. I was in tears. I fight, you fight. Oh God, that was good.
No, that's a good moment. I don't know that they needed it, and it probably, for me, it added a little time that I thought could have been cut from the runtime. But yeah, I didn't hate it. I didn't hate that at all. It just,
guys,
maybe didn't need it.
He's just upset because he can't watch the movie 12 times in 24 hours now, because it's just over 2 hours. So he can only watch it 11 times in 24 hours.
Is that all it is?
Yeah,
how long did it end up being? Is it
I thought it was
2-hour movie?
I think it's just 204 or something. I'm not sure.
Wow, it felt like 2.5 hours to me, but okay, 2 hours
was it really
is a good
that long?
runtime.
I don't
know. It felt like it.
Now I'm gonna look it up.
It just felt like a long movie.
I'm gonna look
Again,
it
my
up.
computer's down, so I can't check.
I'm checking. It's 2 hours and 13 minutes, but I think that includes credits. So
it does include credits, probably. Yeah. So yeah, 205. All right. Well, I mean, what do you rate it?
I give it. It's a 10, and we're almost out of time, so it's a 10.
Very good. Yeah, I'm gonna go a 9 for me, because it's not just because of the themes and stuff that I am not normally into. It's not normally my cup of tea, but I loved it. I thought it was a really great movie. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, what do you got for me next week?
I'm laughing, of course, because
okay, we can we can admit to the audience we've already recorded next week's episode.
We've already recorded next week's episode, but next week, Travis, you're going to listen to The Magnetic Fields. The Magnetic Fields are the brainchild of DC-based singer-songwriter Stephen Merritt. They released an amazing triple album called 69 Love Songs, which is exactly what it sounds like on the label. 3 discs, 23 tracks per album, every single one of them about some aspect of love. I made a playlist for you of my favorite.
You chose a select few.
A select few. I think it's 15,
okay.
I think it's 15 songs for you to listen to.
Good.
What did you give me?
All right. Excellent. Well, we are finally going to have Matt listen or watch the horror movie classic John Carpenter's The Thing, and from 1982. And not only is Matt going to watch The Thing, and I'm also going to rewatch it again. I've seen it a dozen times probably, but we are going to have a special guest on to help us talk about it, and you will meet her next week. But I'm excited for you to finally be exposed to this classic.
Oh, you're excited to expose me to The Thing?
I am. I am indeed. And hey, if any of you have agreements or disagreements about the way we rate our movies each week, or if you want to tell us what you think about next week's movies, email us at exposingourselvespodcast@gmail.com, or find us on the Facebook page at Exposing Ourselves. And Matt,
yes.
Thank you for exposing yourself to me.
Well, Travis, thank you for exposing yourself to me. I will see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.